Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and I am still at my home here, but we have a great show planned for you, multiple guests coming up for us. Later on, we'll talk to Dog Nation's Connor Riley. We have not had a chance to speak to Connor this week. Connor had some good stuff at the Georgia press conferences this week involving Kirby Smart. He's also written some very interesting pieces at DawgNation.com, so I didn't want the week to pass before we get a chance to connect with Connor. We'll do that coming up a little bit later on today. And also in just a few minutes' time, we'll talk to former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards, my partner for the Dog Nation postgame show on Saturdays, presented by the UGA Bookstore. Terrence will have some good stuff, and you better believe we'll ask him about a guy he knows well, former Marietta five-star prospect and LSU tight end, at least for now, Rick Gilbert. What is the latest on the Gilbert situation? We'll try to get some of that with Terrence Edwards and just his thoughts on, really more importantly, Gilbert as a player. We'll try to cover all of that here in just a little bit. Before that, there is a lot of moving pieces around the final puzzle for the Georgia Bulldogs when it comes to the 2021 class. And I want to deal with some of that off the top of the program and just kind of the rumor, the innuendo that's out there and kind of where things stand now less than a week before the start of the early signing period on Wednesday. And y'all check the math with me. The best that I can tell is there are 5 pretty significant unknown variables left for UGA. Not only 5 names of guys in which Georgia may sign that aren't currently committed. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there are 5 fairly significant unknown variables. And as these guys go, the rest of the class will kind of fall in place behind that. Let me give you the 5 names. You tell me if you're on the same page with me about that. Terry and Arnold, who we've talked about before, good-looking defensive back. Xavier Sorey, linebacker, also out of the state of Florida. You get the 5-star defensive tackle Mason Smith. You've got the elite pass rusher out of California, Corey Foreman, and Donavon Edwards, the running back out of Michigan. Would you guys agree that those are the 5 unknown variables for Georgia, the 5 big names that are out there, and depending on what they do, depending on how things unfold with those guys, that's going to determine a lot about how the final parts of Georgia's 2021 class kind of come together. So with that in mind, and these players also in mind too, let me rattle through a few pieces of stuff that you've been kind of seeing in the online chatter as of late that kind of maybe it's a false positive, maybe it provides us a glimpse towards something. But this is just kind of where things stand here at the moment. And actually, I want to start with something other than just those 5 names. I did think it was interesting, a couple of the things that you've seen from Georgia commits on social media the last day or so. Let me start with David Daniel here. David Daniel, very good-looking defensive back prospect, kind of a wink and a nod towards something on social media, saying that he had just gotten some really good news. A lot of folks kind of left to wonder what that was. Both Daniel's mom and dad weighed in on that to say, yeah, we did get some really good news. Now, maybe that's related to a player that could join in the class of 2021, or maybe that's related to something specific for Daniel. We'll hear from Kirby Smart later on the show about some of the moving pieces that have had to be kind of shifted around to make room for all the guys who want to be early enrollees. It's possible that Daniel's referencing maybe something related to that. But listen, I think overall bottom line is it's always good news when Georgia commits are happy on social media. Daniel's an example of that. You also had Tyron Ingram Dawkins recently, the defensive line commit for UGA, who was also kind of, hinting with some smiling faces and, basically an emoji that signified, signing that he's either looking forward to doing that himself, making that official, or possibly referencing some other players. TID has been a little bit of a pretty vocal figure for Georgia recruiting on social media in terms of pushing for other recruits. I guess we'll not really know for sure exactly what Ingram Dawkins might be thinking there, but both Daniel and Ingram Dawkins lately have expressed some excitement, some happiness, related to either their situation or the situation around them with UGA recruiting. So we'll probably just keep right on following that. Then there's news involving 2 guys who've been, pretty fast friends, pretty closely connected during this 2021 recruiting process. Terry and Arnold, who you've read about with Jeff Sintel on the page of DawgNation.com. Jeff has told us that Arnold is going to take his decision all the way into February. But here we are on this final weekend before the early signing period. Both Arnold on social media, and you'll see this on your screen, and then Xavier Sorey on social media talking about the opportunity to take a visit to Florida on that final weekend. Now, in the case of Sorey, this is going to get some attention. Some Georgia fans may be fairly concerned about this. it's obviously never a good thing, you would think anyway, when a player takes that final visit somewhere else before your school on that final weekend. But this is kind of the built-in advantage that Florida has here, being the in-state school. Story's obviously visited Florida plenty. I don't know that I read too much into this to say that, well, that must mean that he's not going to go to Georgia if he's visiting Florida there at the end. It's just the thing that you always kind of face the challenge with when you're going into that final weekend, that Sorey has a chance to go back to Gainesville, somewhere he's been before. There has been some online chatter suggesting that Terry and Arnold might be leaning in the direction of Florida maybe a little bit more, knowing they're closely bonded and connected. You certainly get the feeling that Arnold could be potentially working on Sorey there in that direction. So pay attention to that, follow that, as we said before. That is some of the moving pieces that you got to think about closely as you head towards that on the start of the early signing period on Wednesday. I mentioned before, there's also Mason Smith, the five-star defensive tackle who's out there. The big question looming for him is whether or not the turmoil, and I don't really know if there's any other word to describe this, we'll have more on this on today's show, but the turmoil involving LSU right now, that's the in-state pull for Mason Smith. If Xavier Sorey is feeling a little bit of an in-state pull towards Florida, the in-state pull towards for Mason Smith would be towards LSU. But LSU's been dealing with all kinds of weird drama as of late, whole bunch of opt-outs. We've talked about Rick Gilbert on this show. There have been rumors and rumblings of even others. It's not been a particularly good news cycle for LSU as of late. How much of this is Mason Smith really even noticing? And if you're Georgia, and obviously you hope to win the five-star battle again for Mason Smith, is LSU right now even Georgia's stiffest competition? Is there a possibility this is maybe a school like Alabama that looms even bigger than this? We've seen Alabama go into Louisiana, by the way, before and get top-flight defensive line prospects, so this wouldn't be the first time. I did think it was interesting that Smith recently sat down with his local newspaper in Houma, Louisiana. They put this video out. I'll make sure I put a link to the full video when I post the show later on today at the world-famous DawgNation.com. DawgNation Daily, of course, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. But I wanted to give you a little bit of Mason Smith here on audio, just to kind of give you an idea of, for all these prospects, Smith may be among the biggest for Georgia, the labor they're going through late in the process before they make their ultimate decision. This is Mason Smith talking to his hometown paper in Houma, Louisiana, about exactly what all he's thinking here at the moment. Take a listen to this.
Are you ready for that big moment?
Yeah, I'm definitely ready to get it over with. Definitely ready to get it over with.
You know where you're going to go yet? Or is
Nah, it's still up in there. I feel like I'm gonna take it all the way to the signing day to make my true decision. Because I don't want to make a decision that's not something that I second guess. Like, I want to make a decision and be like, all right, that's my decision. I can't backtrack. I can't do none of that.
So Smith there says he wants to feel good about the decision when he ultimately makes it. He doesn't want to have any kind of reason to backtrack. So obviously what's going on in LSU, you would think, would weigh pretty heavily on his mind. And he talked even more about his attempt to try to block out people like me that clearly would want him to go to a certain place. He says he's trying to block out all of that noise. Here's Mason Smith again.
I'm not the type of person to really feed into that. So it hasn't really been hard for me at all. Except just getting headaches from my phone blowing up so much. That's about it. But from like fans and stuff, I don't really feed into that, because at the end of the day, it's my decision. A fan ain't gonna be, on the field playing for me, practicing for me, in the weight room lifting for me. So I really just stay content to my few people that I really care about, like my mom or dad, my little sister, stepmom, just family. That this decision would affect, and I take them in consideration, and I'm gonna just make my decision from there.
Dude, because you got some serious contenders.
It's really between four of them: Miami, LSU, Georgia, and Alabama. That's probably the top, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what's out there for the moment involving Mason Smith, the schools that he's still considering, and all the various voices that he's hearing as he gets ready to make that decision. You also get the sense that his good friend, much similar to Terry Arnold and Xavier Sorey have been good friends, Mason Smith's good friend, Corey Foreman, maybe now going in a little bit different direction. This is typically the way this kind of stuff goes in recruiting, that as you get closer to the end of the process, these guys start having individualized goals that may not quite align themselves with each other the way that they once did. There has been a lot of chatter as of late about Foreman maybe getting back involved with the school where he was once committed, Clemson. In fact, the other day for the Pitt game, when Foreman was in Death Valley there. DJ Uyunglele's father, who obviously has a connection, given the fact that Uyunglele also hails from California. DJ's father was showing off a picture of himself with Corey Foreman. This is the kind of thing that the official channels at Clemson can't do because of the dead period, but for a parent, essentially just a fan in the stands, Foreman also just kind of a fan in the stands that day. Nothing wrong with them showing off the fact that they're there together. So a little bit of photographic evidence that maybe Foreman is kind of moving back in the direction of Clemson a bit, or there's also the possibility that he'd still feel the pull from the in-state, USC. That seems to still be out there for him. Foreman's been a difficult guy to get a read on, but certainly you're hearing more about other schools other than Georgia for the moment. All right, so you're with me thus far. Of the big names that I mentioned a moment ago, you've got the big chance of Arnold and Sorey visiting Florida here late in the process. Mason Smith recently saying that he's just trying to make sure he feels good about his decision, and we're all curious to see the unrest at LSU might impact that. And then there's Donavon Edwards, the running back from Michigan, who there's been some curiosity related to here for a while of how real it could be with him in Georgia. Are there other schools, like I say, a Notre Dame potentially at play here? Much the same way problems for LSU, potentially opening the door for a guy like Mason Smith to end up at Georgia possibly. People wonder with questions about Jim Harbaugh's future, does that impact the situation, for Donavon Edwards maybe getting out of the state of Michigan? I do want to give you a quick quote here from this is from Edwards' high school coach who spoke recently to 24/7 Sports. His name's Ron Bellamy. He also played football at Michigan, and he was kind of asked about, the notion that Donavon Edwards might not, go to Michigan, then he might go somewhere else. I thought this was kind of telling, and I think the indication that you get here, even though Michigan's kind of fallen by the wayside a bit when it comes to the program, that doesn't make it any easier for a guy like Edwards to leave that state to go play college football anywhere else. And Ron Bellamy's quotes 24/7 Sports, a part of a podcast the Michigan folks up there did. Pretty good proof of this. This is what Bellamy says. He says there are coaches that are telling him about Michigan. He says, I won't name the schools because the schools asked me about it. They said, why is that even an option? And sometimes this is Bellamy, Edwards' coach, saying, I have to tell the coaches because it's Michigan. It's Michigan. That's why. I think coaches forget sometimes that I went to Michigan. This is Bellamy. This is Edwards' high school coach. So I'm not going to sit here and talk all negative, let you talk all negative about my football program. Negative recruit. That's not going to happen. But if you win in the sweepstakes, you won because you're a great recruiter. You have a great product and you sell your product. So that's Ron Bellamy there talking about the situation with Michigan all the way around. Pretty interesting stuff. And listen, I don't know that ultimately Bellamy is going to have the final say on where Donavon Edwards gets to go. We would presume that Bellamy's a pretty good counselor for him, given the fact that he's his high school coach. But it is certainly proof that it's difficult for a player like Edwards to leave his home state. Maybe the same thing for Smith eventually there as well, that even in the midst of bad times, that doesn't turn the voices down of people saying go to Michigan. If anything, it turns them up to say, this is how bad we need you. So 5 big names for Georgia, all of which that'll have a big say on the conclusion of Georgia's 2021 class. Xavier Sorey, Terry and Arnold, possibly visiting Florida, Mason Smith, contemplating all the things going on there in his home state of Louisiana. Corey Foreman may be trending away from the Dogs here a bit at the moment. And then a Donavon Edwards opportunity that Georgia, I think, would still very much love to be a part of. That is all worth watching, and we'll pay attention and see where the twists and turns of the drama take us next. My name's Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. No matter how you get to us today. Video, even from my home, radio podcast, hopefully pretty close to the same as always, and all made possible by our friends at Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Listen, a lot of us are doing like I'm doing right now, which is spending a whole lot more time at home. And I think what it reminds you of is that if you find yourself in the midst of a challenging relationship, this weird work circumstances a lot of us find ourselves in, I think makes that even more difficult. That's why I would invite you to reach out to Meriwether and Tharp if you find yourselves in what has become an untenable situation. Listen, divorce is a tough thing to talk about, but it's an important thing to have someone on your side, a strong advocate, if you find yourself in the midst of that. So trust my friends at Meriwether and Tharp. They are your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. When you go to the website, there are free podcasts, there are free blog posts. There are all kinds of ways for you to educate yourself with the divorce process. And then if you feel like that, unfortunately, that may be something that you need to do, you can also have an initial consultation on the telephone with one of Meriwether and Tharp's attorneys, and they'll kind of help lay out the process for you. So I don't want you to have to go through this, but if you find yourself in the midst of about to have to do it, the thing I do want for you is to have someone on your side. That's what Meriwether and Tharp can be online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. Looks like Terrence Edwards is with us now and ready to go. Since we're at home and kind of going off the fly, Michael, why don't we hold off on Around the Doghouse here for a moment and just kind of dive right into Terrence Edwards, who's good enough to join us as he does here on Thursdays. Of course, we'll see him this weekend for the Dog Nation postgame show, and I'm looking forward to that, but I'm also looking forward to talking to him about some Georgia football here right now. Terrence, thanks for being with us here today on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you're doing well.
All right, I'm doing well, and thanks for having me as usual.
So I'm sure that you're probably maybe expecting a question along these lines, because I know this is a young man that you know pretty well, but there's been some rumblings and some chatter about, but it's not even, I guess it's official now that he's at least opting out. Rick Gilbert's a guy that you know who's had a great freshman season at LSU, and yet maybe, looking to rehab his body a little bit. Maybe rumors are looking to contemplate a new college home. What do you think of the news that's been out there related to Rick Gilbert here over the course of the last couple of days?
It's shocking. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to him. I sent him a message for him to call me. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to him yet, just to pick his brain and ask him why. Never try to change these kids' decisions. I just want to, understand. Try to give him some advice if needed, pros and cons. But seemed like his mind is made up, and for whatever reason, it looked like he's gone to transfer. But I don't know that, and I wish him well. Whatever he does, he having a great season at LSU. Yeah. So for whatever reason he's looking to get out, it must be a good reason.
So a couple things for me on this, and I'm not like you. I'm not a former player. I'll never know what it feels like to be a Rick Gilbert. But I do feel like I understand the thing of when you're taking official visits places, every school seems like a great school, right? And everybody will tell you, hey, you got to picture yourself really living there, and you've got to see if you really do think you could make this place your home for 3 or 4 years. And, we tell that to recruits, but I think it's actually probably harder to truly do that than sometimes we let on. And for a guy like, Rick, leaving Marietta, go to Baton Rouge, it's one thing when they're in the midst of a national championship year and Joe Burrow's the quarterback and Joe Brady's the passing game coordinator. But when some of that magic kind of fades, whether this is true for Gilbert's case or not, I won't presume to know, but I do find it easy to imagine the challenge of making a place like that feel like home when you don't have as much information to go on the front end as you might have preferred.
Correct. It's hard to judge off a visit or going to a game to understand it. Can I really live here for the next 3 or 4 years? I think Georgia kids or in-state kids, wherever you live, always have to look at your in-state schools first, because that's home. At the end of the day, most players, no matter if you're a 15-year veteran or the NFL made tons of money, you're going to presumably go back to your home state where you come from. So it's probably tough on him, being away from his mom and his sister and his grandmother and his father and his brothers and just his friends here, being able to watch him up close every Saturday. So it's tough on the kid. So I don't know, like I said earlier, I don't know if that's the reason or not, but that was one of the reasons I stayed here, that my family, it was important for me, for my family to see me every Saturday. And that was one of the main reasons I stayed in state.
Absolutely. And plus, after your brother had done what he'd done at Georgia, they weren't going to let you get away anyway, Terrence.
Right.
So let me just give you one more thing on this. And this is obviously just my opinion, and I'm sure you're not surprised to hear this. I think that Rick had such a great career at Marietta and has validated that so well with his freshman year at LSU. I can't presume to know where Gilbert would go if he does eventually transfer. But I can tell you this, Terrence, I'm not sure there is a playmaker in the 2021 class that I'd want more than Gilbert if I thought Georgia had a chance to get him. This is a guy who caught balls like a wide receiver at Marietta. You've obviously worked very closely with him. They just don't make a lot of a lot of prospects that are built in the unique way in which Gilbert seems to be put together. As a fan of this team, and I am, and as a fan of Gilbert's personally, and I am that as well, if I could see Gilbert and Silver Britches next year, I'd be pretty happy about that.
Right. He brings a different dimension. He's built different, like you say. He's 6'5". I haven't seen him in a while, but he's probably 260 right now. But it's a good 260, a lot of muscle, a lot different than Kyle Pitts I worked with before. Kyle is 6'6" and lean. Eric is 6'5" and muscular, and he can really change the game for us in line blocking. He can stretch the defense through the seams, and he can go outside and run like a receiver. So he's a different type of animal that I don't think since Ben Watson we have had a guy of that caliber.
That's a really good comparison, a very interesting comparison all the way around. Georgia hosts Missouri on Saturday. Obviously, you and I will be talking about that in the evening as part of our DawgNation postgame show presented by the UGA Bookstore. Terrence, I think it's obvious here after pretty good passing game against Mississippi State a couple of weeks ago, big explosion of points, maybe more run-oriented against South Carolina. A chance to see more improvement for the Georgia offense this weekend against the Tigers. Going to be cold, may have some precipitation in the air, possibly, I guess. But pushing all that aside, another chance for the Georgia offense to show some improvement on Saturday. To me, that's a pretty big deal for UGA. I'm sure you agree with that. I
think so. Any opportunity that you can go out and get better with each and every game is a big step. I think now the offense want to put two good games together for us. Run pass options. We ran the ball heavy last week with great success. The week before, we threw for 400 yards with great success. Now let's put that together. Let's put both those elements of the offense together and go out and have a offense explosion where it's fun for everyone. Winning is always fun, and those receivers had a great time blocking for those backs. But we also want to see the ball in the air. A friend of mine just sent a stat to me that Alabama, Devontae Smith and Najee Harris. Devontae got 15 touchdowns. Najee had 20. That's the production that we're looking for. And I mean, I think we have those type of guys. Now we just got to put it together.
Well, it's the biggest reason, Terrence, why I would say that Alabama is the best team in the country and a team like Florida isn't. And that's more than just me being a Gator hater here. But Florida doesn't have Najee Harris. Florida's obviously throwing the ball to Pitts well, and they got Tony involved and Copeland. They got good receivers, and obviously Trask has got a really good year. But you're not seeing Dameon Pierce and those Florida running backs have the same level of success. And so if you imagine the playoff, Alabama, because it's got Smith and Harris, and obviously Mac Jones is putting it up. That's just an offense that becomes, really hard to stop. So from Georgia's standpoint, it's the same way. Yeah, you're trying to get JT Daniels going. You're trying to get the passing game, kind of up to par. Everybody understands that's what Georgia needs. But you've got to have that Najee Harris style running game too, don't you?
You do. And I mean, just think about this. A defensive game plan going to the meeting. It's like, what are we going to stop this week? Is it going to be passing game or is it going to be the running game? With Bama right now, you can't bring that extra body in the box to stop Najee because of those receivers and Mac Jones. So with Florida right now, you could keep a too high safety and don't worry about the running game. Let your front seven take care of the running game and keep an extra defender in the back end. But Alabama, you got to pick your poison. You got to pick one or the other. You can't take away both. And when you try to take away both, you're not going to take away anything. So Bama really makes you decide what you want to do. You got to be able to do both in times, but you got to be able to take one away in certain elements as well.
Want to do more in the Georgia-Missouri game here coming up in just a moment. Let me remind you, though, this same kind of conversation is what you hear on Saturday afternoon on the UGA, I should say the DawgNation post-game show presented by the UGA Bookstore. Terrence Edwards has been a great part of that all year long. We've been proud to partner with the UGA Bookstore now. This is year number 5 of our partnership with the UGA Bookstore. I'm actually wearing clothes today from the UGA Bookstore. If you want to get stocked up, loaded up for all the apparel you need for the holiday season, for those folks on your shopping list, check out the UGA Bookstore. When you're in Athens, they're open 7 days a week. Or if you can't get to the Classic City right now, you can shop anytime online, 24 hours a day at UGABookstore.com. It is Nike coaches gear, Vineyard Vines, Tommy Bahama, the 47 brand. The only place you can get the UGA 10 line from Peter Millar, a unbelievable selection of UGA apparel at UGA Bookstore. Find them online at UGAbookstore.com. Terrence, how much more interesting is this game on Saturday for you now that Missouri has really kind of separated itself from kind of that lower pack in the SEC? Eli Drinkwitz, their first-year coach, has really had a good year. They've earned their way out of they've guaranteed they won't have a losing season this year. They put up 50 points on Arkansas last week. This Missouri team all of a sudden looks a good bit better than I think a lot of us thought it would be at the beginning of the year.
Oh, I think so. They play well. And if you look at comparison, the way we struggle a little bit, I know that was the first game of the year, but how Arkansas have been playing this year, I thought if Sam Pittman can get that win against Missouri, I would have pushed for him being coach of the year in the SEC. So Missouri did a great job of beating a well-coached Sam Pittman team. So we can't go into this game thinking that it's a pushover. It's going to be, like you say, it's going to be cold up there. So those guys have to go with a mindset that we have to play. We have to go and finish out the season strong. And for the seniors, they are playing for something. They're trying to be the most senior class have the most wins in Georgia history. So they are actually playing for stuff and go out with pride. I think Coach Kirby recruit guys with pride. I think Richard LeCant and those guys are going to continue to preach. Let's finish out this season. We don't opt out. We don't go in and take teams lightly here at Georgia. So they're going to go in. They have to go in and be ready to play. If not, we may have a bad Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Hopefully we'll be having a fun conversation and not the bad one. But you're right. You got to be ready for Missouri. Otherwise, it can go south on you quick. Let me finish with this very, very quickly. We did see a couple Georgia receivers put their name in the transfer portal this week. Micaiah Tongue, who's a good-looking athlete out of Louisiana. Trey Blunt, who I see the Pace Academy sweatshirt on in front of you. Trey obviously had a great career at Pace and was a guy that played a lot for Georgia in his freshman season. Probably didn't get targeted maybe as much as he would have liked to have, but certainly was on the field a lot in his freshman season in 2017. I certainly understand the need for both these guys to say, hey, we want to be a part of a program where we can be kind of the focal point of the offense. I get that for both those guys. And Terrence, for me, this is why I'm glad the transfer portal exists. There are, plenty of maybe abuses of the portal from time to time, and we could obviously maybe cite some of that kind of stuff. But I do believe that under the right circumstances, Tongue can be a player. I know for a fact that under the right circumstances, Trey Blunt can be a player. And, finding that opportunity to go and get the chance at playing time that for whatever reason is not coming at Georgia, that's really what the transfer portal is all about, isn't it?
It is, and I talked to Trey last night, so he's in good spirits. He will graduate in December, so he will be a damn good dog once he leaves. He will have his degree from Georgia. He just look for an opportunity to play. Like you say, he haven't played as much as he would like to play in the last few years. Now it's just about playing the game that he loved, getting an opportunity to play elsewhere. He's always going to love Georgia. Georgia's going to be his school, but now it's about being able to finish out his career and possibly get an opportunity to play in NFL. But now he's just looking for an opportunity where he can be on the field and play.
Well, when you talk to him again, please pass along the fact that we'll be fans of his forever. He's a very impressive football player, and I think he's got a lot of big days ahead of him. Terrence, thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp today. I'll look forward to seeing you on Saturday and hope you enjoy the rest of your week between now and then.
Hey, thanks, B.A. See you Saturday.
All right, good stuff there from Terrence Edwards, former Georgia wide receiver. Very well said on a number of fronts. Interesting to hear some insight from him on a guy he knows well, Gilbert. Also interesting to hear him kind of throw the warning sign up a little bit. Be careful with Missouri. See, Terrence has now been around the post-game show enough to know how that conversation can get nasty quick on a day in which Georgia hasn't played as well as Dog fans think they should. So Terrence kind of already kind of throwing the warning sign up there of, hey, be real careful here. Make sure make sure you get your game face on because Missouri right now is playing pretty well. So we'll follow that and pay close attention. We've got Connor Riley coming up in just a couple of minutes too. I'm looking forward to having Connor on today's show. We'll talk more about Gilbert and everything else with him in just a little bit. I was kind of out of order a moment ago. Let me kind of backtrack here and do what I'd planned on doing a little earlier, which is our Around the Doghouse, delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. And I referenced this just briefly off the very top of the show. Kirby Smart was fascinating, very candid this week on the challenge that kind of awaits Georgia in terms of roster management with the early signing period beginning on Wednesday. As many of you know, and Kirby Smart has talked about this, I had said for a while I didn't think they would do this, but it looks like the NCAA is going to allow seniors not to count against the 85-man scholarship number, which is, I guess, good news for a lot of folks, but it presents some challenges for Georgia in the immediate, because while those seniors don't count next year, for now, they do count against the current 85 because we're still in the 2020 year. And for Georgia, who wants to sign a bunch of guys next week who want to be early enrollees, well, all of a sudden you have a major roster management issue there, because for a guy who wants to be an early enrollee, you have to have a spot on your 85-man roster available for that guy right now. And this is not necessarily an insurmountable problem. It's the kind of thing that Georgia can fix and work its way through. But I think it's really interesting anytime Kirby Smart wants to be especially candid about a topic, because sometimes he takes advantage of his right to keep his cards close to the vest. But in terms of what Georgia's dealing with making sure it's got enough spots for next week, Smart was actually pretty forthcoming about this week, and I thought it was worth giving you a chance to hear that. This is Smart on how the NCAA's rule on allowing seniors not to count against the scholarship limit next year impacts things right now. Take a listen to this.
Seniors that choose to come back for an extra year of eligibility don't count on the 85. That's a bonus. Okay. You're working off your 85. You assume those guys are going to be gone. They've got the flexibility to come back. That's great. I think that's the right thing to do. I think that's super. But now try to make decisions for your organization. Mid-year is a different circumstance. So everything doesn't mesh. Okay. So for us to bring in a mid-year, let's say we have 5 mid-years. That's not the case at all. But let's say we have 5 mid-years that want to come. We have to have a spot for every one of them to come. So for every senior that elects to stay, we don't have a mid-year spot. So even though they won't count on the 85, we don't have a spot for them to come. So, we don't really control what seniors stay, but we certainly want to give them the flexibility. But if we have more mid-years that want to come than seniors that want to leave, we have a problem.
Now, the unspoken part about this from Smart is that the reason why someone is a mid-year enrollee is because they've graduated from high school. So it's not like they can say, well, I guess I'll just go back and do second semester of high school. To be ready to be a mid-year enrollee, you're essentially graduating. You're finishing your coursework there at high school. So some of these guys, could potentially find themselves anywhere to go. They're not, Georgia could potentially not be ready for them. They can't really go back to high school either. That's kind of a tricky thing. And obviously the extra layer of that unspoken conversation is, as Georgia is trying to move things around and make sure they got enough room for all their mid-year enrollees, as Georgia's maybe kind of sweating that number a bit, some other program that has a little more, frankly, not quite as packed of a roster, all of a sudden that becomes one more opportunity for them to maybe get a recruiting edge on Georgia to say, we can definitely take it. We got an early enrollee spot available right now. And obviously Kirby Smart is probably thinking about that as he's saying what he said. And he went into even more detail about exactly all the work that Georgia's having to do to make room for all of its guys starting on Wednesday. This is more from Kirby.
I don't think that all the things mesh real well, especially if you're a program that has a shot at a lot of mid-years. What's different about this year? Kids aren't in high school. So why should I stay for my second semester? So we're looking at, and I don't know other schools, maybe they're the same way, we're looking at the possibility of anywhere from 14 to 20 mid-year enrollees. So let's say we have 20 mid-year enrollees that want to come. We don't have 20 spots. So, but yet the seniors won't count next year, but they're eating spots right now. So it just doesn't add up, doesn't make perfect sense. So it's a dilemma that we have to deal with. And you also have programs that have juniors. So you don't know, juniors, they haven't declared yet, but yet we're having a signing date before the juniors declare. We've been saying for a while, the timing is not accurate, and it really causes some mismanagement. And the people that suffer from that are the high school kids that that may be told one thing and then say, well,
all right, so that's, Kirby Smart there. And it really speaks to one of the frustrations I've kind of had with the NCAA for a while. Of course, there's all kinds of reasons that people can be frustrated with the NCAA, but some of the things they do, the mandates they put out, they kind of do it because it sounds good, but they don't think it all the way through. Some of the spring sports stuff was very much this way, granting extra eligibility to those players in spring sports, but in the kind of cash-strapped world of many of the spring sports around the NCAA, it was almost function like an unfunded mandate where, programs had the right and the ability to bring back players, but not the financial wherewithal to do so. And it's one of those things that the NCAA announces because it looks good on a press release, but all of the other layers behind that maybe aren't fully put together the way that they probably should. As Kirby Smart says here, excuse me, as Kirby Smart says here, it's a little bit the same kind of thing with this of, okay, it's great that the seniors don't count next year, but it ain't next year yet. Right now, it's still this year, and it's a little bit of a problem for Georgia. Here's one more from Kirby on that same subject.
They've told us that the kids are going to have the ability to come back, but every coach has to manage that himself. So they've been in communication in terms of, the seniors getting another extra year of eligibility. That's why to them it doesn't matter. Like, well, they don't count. They're not factoring in that they do count for spring, and it removes a spot that, and I mean, shoot, I'd love to have every senior back. You know what I mean? Like, the seniors are the most valuable parts of your team. I'd love to have every one of them back, but not knowing is what's tough.
Yeah, I think that Smart's words there at the end, that should not be forgotten. That what he's not saying is, oh my gosh, these seniors want to come back and I don't have anywhere to put them. That's not what he's saying. Smart, obviously, if a veteran player at Georgia decided he wanted more football at UGA, that would almost certainly be celebrated as a good thing by Smart. It's just a matter of, much the same way that GMs in professional sports have to manage salary caps, this is the college football version of that. You just got to manage the roster limit in place of you right now. Now, as I said before, I don't play all that audio because I think somehow that's going to blow up in Georgia's face. The truth is, Georgia will figure this out like it figures out everything else. I mean, you want to go back and look at last year's recruiting class. At the end of the cycle, Georgia was signing way more players than I think any of us thought they probably, were going to be able to before the early signing period began. And Georgia just kind of figured out a way to do that, special ways to count guys, different ways, whatever else. They just kind of figured it out. A lot of this happens behind closed doors, and some of it would be too boring to make public anyway in terms of the accounting of how it all gets done. But anytime that Kirby Smart wants to be that specific about his thought process and that intricate in the details of exactly what's going on, it's probably worth playing that audio for you. And so I'm glad you got a chance to hear that as a part of Around the Doghouse, delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza, America's most beloved pizza, real, authentic pizza, made the Italian way. And listen, there's a lot of different ways that you can enjoy this, whether you want to download the Marco's app or marcos.com. And all kinds of pizza options for you, whether you want the traditional pizza, you want the pizza bowl, which is essentially the great flavor of the Marco's pizza without the crust, which for a lot of folks is a real big benefit, plus great savings too. Right now you can get a large one-topping pizza or 10 chicken wings or dippers. That's just $17.99. It's a DawgNation game day favorite. As I said before, you can find it on the Marco's app or at marcos.com, and I hope that you'll take advantage of that today. We're going to get Connor Riley coming up in just a little bit. I'm looking forward to chatting with Connor. Before that, let's do an SEC through and kind of fly through and get some of the other news around the SEC for a moment. I'll also give a quick shout out to my friends at Classic City Lager. Good cold beer. It is an Athens original from Creature Comforts Brewing Company. You can check that out, 6 and 12 pack cans, wherever you are shopping here this holiday season. They'll have some Classic City Lager. You're having a holiday party with neighbors, friends, socially distant, of course. We want to take good care of each other this time of year. But when you're getting together, Classic City Lager goes great with that. Find it wherever you like to do your shopping, 6 and 12 pack cans, or stop by and see them in the Snow Tire facility right there in downtown Athens. They will take good care of you. It is a Classic City Lager from our friends at Creature Comforts Brewing Company. All right, a couple of SEC through stories to get to, and we'll get Connor Riley coming up after that. First of all, I did think it was pretty fascinating. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you for a moment. It's been a kind of a challenging few days. I think for a lot of us, this coronavirus stuff, here during the holiday season, it's just sort of led to some stressful situations here and there. So I don't know that I've been laughing a lot at social media the last few days, but when I saw yesterday that LSU had decided to self-impose a postseason ban in a year in which they're about to be, 3-6 after they lose to Florida on Saturday, I have to say that's a level of moxie that I think is pretty uncommon. I thought that was pretty entertaining all the way around, but that is what LSU has decided to do with the NCAA kind of at their door. Why not take a year in which a lot of teams are going to turn down bowls anyway? Why not just call this a self-imposed ban? We wanted to go to the Weed Eater Bowl, but we're not doing that because we want to self-impose these violations as a way of staying in the good graces of the NCAA. It takes a lot of self-confidence to even put this out as a release. So when I saw this yesterday, I howled pretty good at that. I thought that was pretty funny. So all the way around, pretty good stuff for LSU. And it ties into what we were saying before. This in itself is really not that big of a deal. It's more humorous than anything. But if you just do a basic Google search for LSU football, you got to scroll and scroll and scroll to kind of get past bad news. It seems like it's been that way for a few days now. So how does this all eventually impact Mason Smith? And at this point in time, is LSU even Georgia's number one competitor for him? That's one of those big unanswered questions, leftover discussions as we head towards the early signing period. You also saw yesterday outside the SEC, the Big Ten changing its rule to make it possible for Ohio State to still go to the Big Ten title game with fewer than 6 regular season games. This, of course, became a necessity, at least in a perceived necessity after the Michigan-Ohio State game was canceled on Saturday. I really don't have a problem with the Big Ten changing this rule because the rule itself was just made up a few weeks ago anyway. It's not like something that was like in the dusty old bylaws that has been now etched out. This is all made up on the fly anyway. Why not do that again? I guess the one point I've kind of always said here is Ohio State's biggest issue was not whether or not it played in the Big Ten title game. Its biggest issue is, does it have enough games, period? Listen, before the season began, I was very confident that Ohio State was one of the 4 best teams in the country. I guess I presume that's probably still true, but you still got to play some games against someone. So Ohio State's issue is not whether or not they're Big Ten champs. Ohio State's issue is, do they have enough football games played so someone like me can feel somewhat comfortable saying, yeah, I guess they really are one of the 4 best. So more football for them is what really matters more than anything else. And that's what the Big Ten title game, I guess, is going to give them a chance to do. Obviously, being the brand that they are, it seems likely that they'll probably work their way into the playoffs somehow, and the Big Ten makes that a little bit easier there. Last SEC through story I want to get to. I did think it was pretty interesting to see Jimbo Fisher say, this is the Texas A&M coach, and he's obviously, it looks possible and likely that he'll be on the outside looking into the playoff discussion when it comes to an end in a couple of weeks' time. He thinks they'll eventually have to expand the thing to 8 anyway to make room, as he says, for all the teams that need to be in there. And I guess my number one argument in favor of playoff expansion is the fact that anything that takes the decision-making process out of the committee's hands, I'm kind of all in favor of. And this goes back to something that Pat Forty, I think, wrote the other day. It's not that big of a deal to me that the Big Ten's changing the rules for Ohio State, but it does ask the question, or begs the question of, well, if the Big Ten's doing this to protect Ohio State, and if the ACC's doing certain things to protect Notre Dame and possibly Clemson, what's the next level of that? Does all of a sudden now the officiating also protect these teams in the games that they play? I think the way in which the playoff is decided now, I think it leaves room for kind of an unpleasant conversation of, I hate to sound this way, but we can also, to a degree, feel like a rigged system. The more that you take the decision out of the committee's hands, though, the more you've kind of, is this the right way to say it, democratized all this again, where it's like, actually meritocracy on the field of, if you win this conference, you make it. If you get here, you make it. You still leave room for a couple of at-large teams, but there's just less decision-making power in the hands of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, which overall, I believe, is probably a good thing. So interesting to hear Jimbo Fisher saying that, especially in a year in which he may be number 5, which is the worst place to be in the world of a 14 playoff. Will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, let me roll on here. Normally on Thursdays, this is the time of the show where I give you my Kroger Fresh Take, because after all, Kroger is fresh for everyone. But today, I'm actually going to get some assistance and some help with the Kroger Fresh Take. I want to bring in my buddy Connor Riley. Connor's had some good stuff at DawgNation.com this week. A lot of this related to LSU tight end, at least for now, Rick Gilbert. You better believe we'll get there before we're done on today's program. But there's more than that. I want to make sure I speak with Connor here for a moment. Connor, welcome into the program, and I hope that you are doing well.
Yeah, I'm hoping not to bring any steel takes in here today. So, as always, a pleasure to be on with you, BA.
I appreciate that. Let me just kind of pick up where I was just speaking before you joined us. I really don't have a problem with the Big Ten changing its rules here for Ohio State, given the fact that the rule they changed had only existed for about 6.5 minutes anyway. To me, the complaint against the Buckeyes is how few games they've played in terms of really being a playoff team. But they're clearly the best team in the division. Indiana itself has essentially acknowledged this. Indiana lost head-to-head to Ohio State. I don't find myself scandalized by the Big Ten rule change. Do you?
Yeah, no, my issue isn't with the Big Ten and what they're doing to try and get Ohio State into the college football playoff. Essentially, the college football playoff has set up these programs, these elite programs, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State. I'd include Georgia, Notre Dame in that mix as well, as to sort of function as an oligarchy where it's, 6 or 7 elite powers sort of controlling things and controlling where the money goes within the college football playoff system. And if you have a chance to get one of those 4 spots, the money for getting into the college football playoff is so lucrative for the entire conference. You have to do that. Otherwise, it is just negligence on the part of the conference there. So you mentioned expanding to 8 teams. I'd like to see that go even further to 16 teams to just give it a more sort of, as you say, democratized chance. And because again, the difference between 4 and 5, I don't feel is all that much greater than 8 and 9. I think there's still going to be some pretty contentious debates in there, especially if you open up the can of worms of, okay, well, if you're giving auto bids out, that really only leaves room for 2 or 3 at-large teams. Whereas I think if you go to a 16-team playoff and the 16 and 17 teams are Northwestern and North Carolina, I think that's a little bit more of a fair system overall and something I'd like to see implemented.
But I believe the presence of those at-large teams is actually going to raise the quality of the playoff. Right now, we have a pretty bad stretch of what I would call blowout games in the semifinals. And I think that the way in which the 4 teams are currently selected is part of the reason why. But if you give me more at-larges into the playoff, and this is also a selfish thing because in a lot of years that would have included Georgia recently, but it's the presence of those at-large teams, the teams that truly are possibly among the 4 best, but they don't have the most deserving credentials. Them winning a quarterfinal game or them winning them winning a quarterfinal game and running their way to the national semifinal, all of a sudden you truly do have the best 4 teams playing in the semifinal now, which the selection committee does not seem capable of doing based on their kind of paint by numbers approach to this.
Right, because let me even paint you a scenario. Let's say Ohio State gets into the college football playoff. I think we'd both probably agree it was a down year for the Big Ten football-wise. Wisconsin, Michigan, Penn State probably in any given year are the 2 through 4 most talented teams in that conference. None of those teams have winning records right now. So what happens if Ohio State goes into the college playoff and just gets the floor wiped with it against Alabama, say, if they're the 4 seed? That just makes this playoff continue to look terrible. Whereas if you do have those more games, add more games, whether it be an 8-team, a 10-team, a 12-team, whatever you decide to go with, that does, I think, set you up better to have in those semifinals the actual 4 best college football teams, as opposed to the 4 that have the deepest pockets or the 4 that have the most incentive to be in those games.
Let me switch gears here for a moment. You've written about a Rick Gilbert this week. I'm obviously, as the kids say, I'm on a Rick Gilbert stan. I believe that's what the kids would say. I think he's just a phenomenal player. I thought you definitely got some really good answers from Kirby Smart, not on Gilbert because he can't speak about him directly, but on just the subject in general. And Smart obviously knows why he's being asked the questions he's being asked. But here's the one thing I can't quite figure out yet because we're still in early days. Is this a thing or not? Is Rick Gilbert really on the radar for Georgia, or is this just something blowhards broadcasting from their living room hope happens?
So for me, it became a thing yesterday when there was a quote where Ed Orgeron in the SEC coaches teleconference directly acknowledged transferring with Gilbert. He said, "Is Gilbert transferring? I don't know that yet." I think when Orgeron said that to me made it a lot more real than the message board, anonymous source sort of stuff that you have seen out there. Gilbert has opted out on the season and he can't turn pro yet, even though I think he might have the ability to be that kind of a player. It is worth following going forward. I don't necessarily know if this is going to be a quick and easy solution. It wouldn't surprise me if this situation dragged on into January. But if you're a Georgia fan, just given the reports are that he's homesick. Georgia is the closest school to his home in Marietta, and they were a very serious factor in his recruiting process. In fact, Georgia was the last school that he visited before committing to LSU. I know Alabama finishes the runner-up there, but if you're a school like Georgia or an Alabama or even a Clemson and a Tennessee, this is real and I believe worth paying attention to.
And, of course, Terrence Edwards said a moment ago that he assumed he was going to transfer. I guess my question is, though, can Georgia, if he does, do what it couldn't do before, which is earn his services? And Connor, you say, and you're right, well, Georgia got that last visit, and they were in kind of that hometown position. And if the word homesick is being used now, then obviously, Georgia have a chance to pounce on that as the in-state school. But I would say that, and Gilbert, unfortunately, was pretty candid about this, Georgia did not have a good brand, I believe, in his eye in terms of the offense a year ago. As a fan, I'm hopeful that that's now a little bit better sell because Todd Monken's employed here, because I believe that Georgia is better offensively than it was last season, even if it's only by a degree or so. Do you think the Georgia offense sells itself better to a guy like Gilbert if this is indeed a redo for his college choice?
So right now, I think it's still fair to question how new and how improved this offense might be, given with the JT Daniels insertion. It's really only a 2-game sample size that you're working with here. But as I mentioned ago, I don't necessarily think this is going to be something that is done by the end of the week. I think Gilbert's going to take his time with this and sort of see where things are potentially further down the line. Say Georgia looks really good against Missouri, which I think could certainly be the case. So they blow out Vanderbilt and then look really good in the bowl game. JT Daniels announces he's coming back in early January. I think at that point, it looks much more, you have a much better idea of what this offense is going to look like, especially in 2021, with potentially Todd Monken at the OC position and JT Daniels at quarterback. And from there, I think that offers a much better selling point for a player like Gilbert.
And I would also say, too, not to get lost in the weeds on this, but while the important evaluations, what happens with JT Daniels as a quarterback, the truth is, and I'm, kind of on an island on this sometimes, I thought they'd shown some improvement year over year, even prior to JT Daniels taking over as starting quarterback. I think that Todd Monken is a tremendous upgrade over James Coley, in other words. And even with the kind of disjointed year this is, I'd love for Gilbert to validate that the offense at Georgia is in better hands with Monken, even though at times Monken's been working with some kind of unusual personnel.
Yeah, the plays I think have been there all year. The receivers have been open, which was not the case last year. Anyone watching that offense led by James Coley in 2019, I think, could say that. So the plays have been there. It's just the question of does Georgia have the quarterback to get them the ball? If JT Daniels is that guy, I believe the answer to that is yes. If JT Daniels decides to go pro, which is something we have to reckon with here in the next month or so before that 2021 early entry date passes, I think it's fair to ask questions of what Georgia does at the quarterback position, just given how poorly mismanaged it was to start this season.
We'll spend a minute or two more here. I started the show by saying I believe that there are 5 names that they're not the only guys that Georgia can sign, but these are the moving pieces that I think will determine how everything else falls into place. I think it's Arnold and Sorey, the Florida guys. I think it's Edwards, the running back. I think it's Mason Smith, the big 5-star from Louisiana. And I'll put for now Corey Foreman in there too. Seems like Foreman's probably leaning other directions right now. The Clemson poll seems strong. Maybe it ends up being USC. Mason Smith, I really don't know what to expect from him right now. I would say that Georgia's in it. I just don't know beyond that. The Sorey-Arnold thing is, I think, interesting, especially with the thought that Sorey may visit Florida here this weekend. First of all, do you agree that those are the 5 big unknown variables that kind of move everything else around? And do you have, much of a thought on that beyond that?
So, yeah, the one you didn't mention there, or go deep in, I should say, Edwards.
Yeah.
If it meant that you knew you were getting either 1 year of either James Cook or Zamir White or both, would you pass on Edwards?
I think, look, I got to be careful how I answer this. I really would like Donavon Edwards to come to Georgia because, the one thing that seems really interesting about him is, and he said this on, I think it was a Rivals interview that with the Michigan people up there, that McGee and Kirby have said to him, we're loaded at running back. We like who we like who we have. But there's like the dynamic, whatever the word you want to use is, explosiveness that Edwards might have a chance to provide. That makes him really interesting for me. That if you said of the 5 that I just mentioned, rank them in the order of who I'd like to come to Georgia, Donavon Edwards would be really high on my list. Edwards might actually be number 2 for me on that list. And I say that assuming that Corey Foreman's probably going somewhere else. I'd probably go Mason Smith 1, Donavon Edwards 2 of the 5 that I just mentioned. Because I do think that dynamic running back for Georgia, and this whole thing with Edwards has been really, really quiet. But if Georgia could get him, that for me, people always like to kind of joke about me chortling or whatever else. You want a good laugh, hearty guffaw laugh from me on signing day? Go get a dynamic, lightning, game-changing type running back. I'd be really happy about that.
So not to sound too much like Jeff Sentell, who will be on tomorrow's show, the highest chortle factor is, Foreman is obviously number one, but he's not announcing until January 2nd. So next Wednesday, the highest chortle factor on our various DawgNation broadcasts could potentially come from a Donavon Edwards commitment for you.
Yeah, when you couple surprise with pleasant surprise with player, I think the best player that Georgia's legitimately pursuing is Mason Smith. I would say Smith is a better player than Donavon Edwards, but I also have perceived Georgia's chances with Smith to be higher than I've kind of perceived them to be from Edwards. But I also said this before you joined us, Connor, not to rehash everything that I've already talked about. There was an interview with Edwards' high school coach with like a 24/7 podcast. And this guy is essentially painting his face maize and blue during the interview. That people assume that Michigan being bad makes it easy for a guy like Donavon Edwards to escape that state. If anything, it only gets people to turn up the heat even more. Mm-hmm. This is how bad we need you. So, even in the midst of a very strange year for Michigan, I don't know that it makes it all that much easier for Donavon Edwards to escape from up there either.
Yeah, the chatter around Edwards has always been a little weird. Yeah, obviously, with guys coming that far, it's can you get them on campus? Can you get them on campus? In the pandemic, you really just can't do that the way you normally would. Notre Dame, Michigan, Georgia,
Oklahoma, I guess a little bit.
Oklahoma, though, I believe Oklahoma is very involved with Kamar Wheaton, running back out of Texas. So it looks like if they grab Wheaton, that probably removes them from the Edwards equation there. It's interesting to me personally. The most interesting ones, the sort of on the Connor Riley chortle factor. I think if you land Xavier Sori on next Wednesday, and he's now a 5-star recruit in the latest rankings bump, you land him. Not only do you land him and his talents at a position in need, a linebacker, you're keeping him away from Florida and also Alabama, I guess. And then I think that really helps you with Terrion Arnold, who, seeing these last couple of games without Richard LeCount, Georgia really just is missing his playmaking ability there at the safety position. And as good as Lewis Cine is, that is not the type of player that he is. And I don't think David Daniels is that type of player either. If you can land a player like that in Arnold, which I believe that he is a more playmaker type safety than what Cine and Daniel figure to be, I think that goes a long way in sort of helping turn things around after what was a sort of disastrous year against Florida.
All right, very last thing. I think Missouri's good. I think there are a lot of teams this particular Saturday that Missouri could beat in the SEC. They've just been on a nice little run as of late. I'll be shocked if Georgia doesn't play well on Saturday. I just get the sense that Georgia, this is the we're getting the band back together moment for Georgia. This is everybody's big game. I have a sneaking suspicion that Georgia won't play on the 19th. That's just me. This is the moment I think in which Georgia really just wants to go out there and put its pedal to the metal. I'm not saying it's going to be pretty, 50 points. I'm not making any kind of like aesthetic prediction about the game, but I expect Missouri to really get Georgia's best shot on Saturday. Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah, they just announced the Vanderbilt-Georgia game is set for a noon kickoff. So go ahead and clear your schedule for December 19th there. I think that could certainly be the case. However, if Georgia comes out and messes around a little bit, this Missouri team is good enough to beat you. And they have found ways to win. They have won close games. They have dominated games against Kentucky and South Carolina. I know the scores. And those games weren't all that big, but they were pretty thoroughly in control throughout those games.
Don't you think that tightens Georgia up? And I mean that in a good way, not like the two playing tight, but it just kind of tightens the screws a little bit this week, knowing that you've got a living, breathing opponent on the other side.
Yeah, and Missouri is a ranked team, and the reality is Georgia's resume right now, they have beaten one team with a winning record all season. I think if you have a potential to add another feather to your cap with Missouri there, and I think there's a lot of people in the national media these past couple of weeks have said some pretty negative things about Georgia, just largely based on where it ranks in the college football playoff rankings. If you go out and go full Death Star on them and blow up Missouri, I think that sort of changes the narrative around Georgia for both this season and perhaps even most importantly going into 2021.
I said this is the last question. This is truly the last question. You're better at bowl projections than I am. I can't keep them all straight. It does seem like, though, that the bowl projections at least from the perspective of the opponent, are getting a little better for Georgia as of late. You put much stock in the fact that Georgia may avoid a Group of 5 team and get a chance to play, as CBS has suggested this week, an Oklahoma maybe in the Cotton Bowl? That sounds awesome.
It does. So that'd be a lot of fun. For that situation to work out, you either need to root for Florida to outright lose this weekend, which I don't think either of us believe happens. Or, well, you'll be rooting for it regardless. Right. Or if Florida looks really bad against Alabama, maybe that opens the door a little bit more for them. But the complication there is Texas A&M figures to get one of those bowls and potentially the highest ranking non-SEC playoff team. That'll go to A&M. As much as I'd love to see Oklahoma right now, if I'm putting on my Steve Kornacki khakis here, I ultimately am projecting Georgia to play Cincinnati in the Peach Bowl, as disappointing as that might potentially be.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's still a pretty good game. I mean, Cincinnati, I think, is a pretty good team, but it's not quite the cachet. Mm-hmm. Here's what I don't know. With the Sugar Bowl being a playoff, does the Cotton Bowl get the Sugar Bowl's old draft pick of, like, top SEC team remaining, and do they have to take the SEC runner-up, or could they choose A&M over Florida if they wanted to?
I believe, yes, that is how it works, that the Cotton Bowl will get the Big 12 winner and the highest non-playoff SEC team. And they have to take the highest non-SEC team.
So it's not the runner-up, it's just whichever team's ranked the highest.
Right. Now, the College Playoff Committee could decide for whatever, let's say they lose that, Florida loses to Alabama close. They could decide to put Florida above Texas A&M.
And at that point in time, they probably would, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, pretty interesting stuff. Connor, thanks so much for being here. Looking forward to talking with you again soon. We'll see you tonight, Cover 4 Live as well. So appreciate all your time.
Yep, as always, a pleasure.
All right, good stuff there from Connor Riley. We'll get ready to wrap up here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp today. Don't forget, a lot of good recruiting stuff there. As Connor said, we'll have Jeff on the show tomorrow. So we'll just kind of, get ready for the start of the early signing period on Wednesday. Some fun final pieces to put together. I think Connor's right that he mentioned Xavier Sorey and the impact that Sorey could have on Terry and Arnold and the value that Arnold could potentially have for Georgia, kind of a post-Richard LeCount world. It's why we kind of started the show by saying what we said, which is that those names, Arnold, Sorey, Edwards, Smith, to a degree still Foreman, what they decide to do, and in Foreman's case, it'll be signing and then announcing later. What they decide to do could open up a lot of other avenues for Georgia all the way around. I love this time of year. I think it's really fun. It's been great to watch Georgia climb its way back into contention for another elite class and getting ready to punctuate that starting next Wednesday. It's been fun to watch that. It'll be great to have more coverage of it with you as well here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Also, let me give a quick shout out to my friends at Kroger. Good stuff there with our Kroger Fresh Take a moment ago. And don't forget, holiday meals are available right now at Kroger. All you got to do is you buy them. You can heat them up yourself. It's really good stuff. Just heat and serve meals from our friends at Kroger. You can choose prime rib, bone-in ham, along with the sides, the bread, and the dessert. It's just $70. That's great savings and a great way to do what this time of year, even the weirdness of 2020, is all about, which is really share a meal and show some love to the people that you do love. Kroger's giving you a great chance to do that. You can order your holiday heat and serve meals today. Just talk to a Kroger Deli associate for more about that, or go to yourorderonline.com. That's yourorderonline.com, and you can take more advantage of that. Make sure you check that out. All right, thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll talk to you tomorrow, everybody. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews Cooldown, where we'll have a chance to get some of your comments here, and make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Of course, R.S. Andrews will be all over you for all of that. Water heater goes out, they can replace it for you in many cases the same day. One of the reasons why I really feel confident and proud to be able to recommend R.S. Andrews here on the broadcast that we do each and every week. All right, so let's get some of your comments here on Facebook, and then we'll get some YouTube, and then we'll kind of roll out of here after that. Matt Rugavina says he's having some issues with comments today. Matt, I'm sorry to hear that. James Crump says A&M goes to the Sugar Bowl and Florida the Cotton Bowl to probably play Oklahoma. The Sugar Bowl's a playoff bowl this year, though, James. So you got a little bit of the Sugar Bowl is typically like that SEC runner-up bowl, but this year it's a playoff bowl, so that kind of reshuffles the pecking order just a bit. Tim Tatum says, what if Bama blows out Florida? And they will. That obviously would be good news for A&M in its bowl positioning if they do, and I think you may be right. Right now, there's something just not quite right with Florida for me. I don't really know how else to say it. It's just not quite where it needs to be for the Gators right now. A little just, not quite dominant, did not cover the spread last week against Tennessee, had to push late against Kentucky to kind of get that margin of victory to where it was supposed to be, and a little flat against Vanderbilt the week before that. I mean, Florida's still a good team, and unfortunately, they have, certainly beat Georgia, which is a pain point for me even still. But there's something in terms of, you want to make the big comparison to programs like Alabama, it's just not quite there with the Florida Gators in my mind right now. To Neil Calvino, yeah, there's a tendency for me to get that one more question in, even after I've said last question. I will admit that's very much true. Tim Tatum says that he told me something earlier this week, and I said no. What was that, Tim? I don't remember what that was. There's no telling what was that. Matt mentioned comments. I'm only seeing a few comments here right now. I don't know if something is going on with that or not. You never know with this Facebook stuff from one day to the next. You never know. Let me go over to YouTube and we'll get a couple, and then after that, I got to run today, and this time I mean that. But I hope all of you are doing really well, having a great day. Over here on the YouTube side of things, Keith Foltz says the problem with Florida is they're still Florida. Yeah, that's about right. Scott Harris says Texas A&M will take any chance to play a Big 12 team. They feel like the Big 12 disrespect them. The problem with that, though, and this is all honesty for me, because as an SEC homer type, I'm not proud to admit this, it is a very poorly kept secret, though, that Scott, A&M has had plenty of chances to play Big 12 teams in bowl games, and they have done everything in their power to keep that from happening. They, there have been a lot of chances to match up Texas Bowl, for instance. Remember a couple years ago, Arkansas beat Texas in the Texas Bowl. This is a game in which the SEC has had some fun putting an SEC opponent against a Big 12 opponent, and there has been a chance for A&M to be that team in the Texas Bowl against a Big 12 team, and A&M has really bent over backwards trying to keep that from happening. So, unfortunately, one of the ways in which the Big 12 stuff kind of works out is through kind of a passive-aggressive way of doing things. And in Texas and Texas A&M's case, that has kind of meant coming up with reasons why they can't play each other. So, unfortunately, A&M has done its share of, at least my understanding of the situation is, they have done their share of ducking when it comes to playing some of these teams, unfortunately. Mike D, funny stuff from him in the YouTube comment section. Frank Patterson says, we had to school these Bama fans today in the chat about who RBU is. Sorry wasn't able to pay much attention today like normal. Hey, Frank, you just go out there and do the Lord's work. No problem whatsoever. Larry Goldberg says, what if UGA wins out and Florida has COVID issues for the SEC championship game? Unfortunately, there is no designation for a replacement in that situation. My understanding is the game would just be canceled and Alabama would be declared SEC champion, unfortunately, as depressing as that sounds. That is my understanding of that, and that Georgia would not be able to be the Miss America or whatever, taking over the duties if Florida's not able to fulfill their obligation. My understanding is there's no concession for that for a school like Georgia, unfortunately. Let's see what else. Keith Old says comments are not working on Facebook today. I hate to hear that, y'all. I'm very sorry. All right, let's do a few more on YouTube. We got to go. Corey Doyle says Alabama will have about 400 yards of offense in the first half against Florida. I'll enjoy every second of it. Yeah, I mean, obviously stranger things have happened, but for now, I just don't really see Florida's ability to stay up with Alabama. Mullen has coached against Nick Saban a lot in his career, and he kept it relatively close in 2014 when he probably had his best team at Mississippi State. But there's not a lot of moments in which Dan Mullen put a big fear into Nick Saban, and there's a huge talent gap in favor of Alabama here. I'm not sure anybody can play Alabama close right now. I don't believe that Florida's capable of doing it. Marcus says, do you think Carson Beck transfers? I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I know there's been some questions about why he hasn't played. As I've said in our comment section this week, my thing on that is that I'm not sure that Beck has actually been treated all that differently than other freshmen would be in his situation. And who can really know what anyone's thinking in any given moment? But hanging around the place where you've been learning the offense and growing comfortable, that really probably could be Beck's best chance at eventually earning playing time. That it's a cliche to say the grass isn't always greener, but when it comes to trying to control outcomes and go somewhere else where you think you're going to be able to thrive, that change of scenery isn't often as valuable as sometimes we give it credit for being, especially when you see the way that Mac Jones has thrived by staying at Alabama and Kyle Trask has thrived by waiting in the wings at Florida. If I was someone like Carson Beck, you better believe I'd be paying pretty close attention to that. Noah Sheldon says Mullen is a little bit better than Jim McElwain. That's it. Hopefully Georgia has a chance to prove that next year. Kind of put Mullen back in his place a little bit. It's going to be kind of a crummy off season waiting for that to happen. And that's why we're going to bring back the Gator Hater stuff eventually. John Adams asked an interesting question about a possible safety transfer. That's an interesting thing to think about. I do think that Georgia's, obviously, Lewis Sean's going to be a big time player next year. You're going to have other guys who are going to have waiting to make that same step up. But if you're looking for a veteran presence, that's a place you might look. And obviously, it wasn't a grad transfer, but a transfer of J.R. Reed years ago. Look how well that worked out for Georgia. Let me just check back over to Facebook one more time to see if anything's still going on over there. Yeah, the last one I'm seeing is Matt Rukavina saying, anyone have any issues with the comments? And after that, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today, and we'll try to take some more comments tomorrow and Friday, close out the week on a strong note. Thanks for being here, part of the RS Andrews Cooldown. Busy broadcast day for us. It's DawgNation Happy Hour day at 4 p.m. Cover 4 live tonight at 7:30 p.m. Jeff with us tomorrow at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily. So busy next couple of days here, getting ready for all the recruiting stuff and everything else, Georgia, Missouri on Saturday. So appreciate you being a part of it. RS Andrews Cooldown and DawgNation Daily presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Y'all have a great day. I will look forward to talking to you again tomorrow.